Howdy, everyone. So after giving the overall plan a little bit more thought, I've decided to, instead of installing the inlet, I forget what they're called, but there are fiberglass pieces that need to go in here to kind of give this inlet more of a fluid flow pattern, if you will. They're pre-made fiberglass pieces that need to be installed. I had planned on doing that next, but after looking at what I have to do and just what makes the most sense for me, I've decided to go ahead and go back to fitting the engine baffles. So now that I have the cowlings fitted to the fuselage, I can now go back to working on the baffles and try to get those fitted to the engine cowlings. So I haven't done anything out of the ordinary yet. I'm just following the written instructions and the plans that come with the baffles. And it's just simple, like we've done before. It's just simple edge finishing, dimpling, and a little bit of riveting just to install these reinforcement type of plates. So I've gone ahead and I've done that with this piece. I've added these reinforcement plates, and then I had to file around the valve cover. These are aftermarket valve covers, so I had to file around them a little bit to get this piece to fit. And like I've talked about in the past when I had been working on these other baffle parts, you want to be able to get these on without any stress. So don't rely on the screws to kind of pull it into shape. You want to be able to run the screws in and out very freely by hand and just have this kind of sit nice on its own. And you don't want large gaps anywhere because you don't want air to escape from inside. Now my plan is, when this is all finished, is to seal around the edges as best I can with some RTV. But I still don't want large gaps around anything if I can help it. So I've got this front side piece fitted. It's the front half of this entire length, I should say. This is a piece. This is a separate piece. So this one is done. This front inlet area is done, but it hasn't been fitted. And I've also got this front inlet area done, but it has not been fitted. And I've got this other side, which I'm working on now. All I have done is riveted the reinforcement plates on, but I haven't fit this around the valve cover. You can see the gaps around the valve cover and the baffle. And you can see, especially here, if I can get my fatness out of the way, you can see here that the bolt hole is not lining up. So I got to work around the valve cover to get this hole and this hole to drop down so I can get the screws in. And then at that point, I got to start shaping all of this stuff. I've got to start shaping all of this to fit the actual cowlings, both the bottom and the top. So I'm just going to plug away at this, and if I come across something that I think might be useful, I'll knock out a video. All right, talk to you guys later. Howdy, everyone. So I am still, of course, working on these baffles, and I've made some progress. You can see that I now have this forward piece is attached, and I have that on both sides. And I also have the inlet ramp pieces. This piece here, this assembly, is also now installed on both sides. Of course, nothing is permanent. All of this has to come out and get reinstalled and come out and get reinstalled, just like the cowling. It's a remove and replace multiple times type of process to get things fit correctly. There are a couple of things I want to recommend and I want to point out. What I had done, I had gotten this piece, this forward piece, fitted. It splits right here. This is a separate piece than this back part. And like I've always talked about before, as with everything else, you want to be able to lay this in place and run the screws in basically by hand. You don't want it stressed at all. You don't want to rely on the bolts to pull things kind of into place. And you definitely don't want to enlarge the holes to get something to fit. You want to do all of your adjustment around the various parts so that the bolt holes will line up the way that they're designed without any stress. You definitely do not want to start elongating holes or making the pre-punched holes larger just to get the piece to fit. It's very tedious, but if you take your time, you can get it figured out and the pieces should drop right in. It's the same with these forward ramps, but these are a lot more of a challenge because you have a lot of areas like back in here that the shape of the ramp baffle assembly has to fit around the odd shape of the engine. And there are some steps here between the engine case and the cylinder. There are some steps. And those little individual steps are actually cut out into the prefabricated pieces that Van supplies. However, they're not perfect. So in order to get this to fit correctly, you have to very carefully trim some of these edges. You can see that this particular piece has to fit between the flywheel, not the flywheel, but the spinner starter ring and the engine case itself. This has to fit in here. And I'll come back to this later when I get to it, but there's another piece that's going to be put in here. But that comes later. But anywho, this piece has a lot of trimming that needs to be done to get it to fit correctly. This particular piece gets attached from underneath. So if you look up underneath here, let's switch hands here. This is a bracket. This is a bracket that gets attached to the baffle and it gets screwed into the engine. The back side of this bracket needs to lay against the edge of the cylinder base. I hope you can see that. So the aft edge of this bracket needs to fit tight against the edge of the cylinder base. When you have that bracket back all the way, then all of this in here will fit nicely against the engine. If this isn't shaped correctly, this part will be moved forward. And that bracket underneath that I just showed will not be up against the cylinder base. And that's going to take this whole piece then and make it stick out. And that's going to cause problems on this side with this stuff aligning correctly if this whole piece is brought out this way. So what I did, I kept trimming away at these different stepped areas in here so that this whole assembly would then move aft. And that bracket that I showed you down below will be all the way aft and the bolt will go in really nice. Having done that, that brought this side all the way in nice. And without having to elongate any holes or without having to drill out any holes, this little bracket right here and its two holes went right together with this side piece. So my point is, don't rush anything. Don't enlarge any holes. Don't elongate any holes. Work on trimming so that everything will just basically fall into place and you can run the screws in and you can get clecos installed without having to alter any of the pre-punched holes as supplied. It's the same on this side. This side is a little bit easier because there's not as much stuff in the way. You trim this here along the edge of the engine so that you can get this bracket into place, and it's the same thing. This aft edge of the bracket needs to fit up against the edge of the cylinder base. If this is leaned out, this whole assembly then is going to want to fall forward, and it's not going to fit correctly, and you're going to have issues getting your screws in. So keep trimming this edge where it meets the engine case so that you can get this bracket to fit up against the cylinder. The other thing you need to remember with this particular piece is there's a screw here. In order to get that screw in, this piece needs to be up against the engine. And you can see in this corner, there's a lot of interference between the baffle and the engine case. If you don't get this corner cleaned out correctly, this assembly is going to want to stick out away from the engine, and you will not be able to get this screw in. Now, you'll be tempted to make this hole bigger or to elongate it, but don't do that. Do not alter this hole. Keep trimming and finessing this edge so you can get this assembly to lean back so that bracket is up against the base of the cylinder, and you want it to slide inboard up against the engine as best you can so you can get this screw into place without issue. If you do that, then again, this little bracket right here will cleco right into place. It will cleco into this ramp assembly, and it will cleco into this side wall right here without any alteration of the holes. So that's where I am currently. Next, I got to start trimming this down, and I got to start trimming these ramps down so I can get the bottom cowling into place. So that's what I'll be doing here in a minute. Talk to you guys later.